Today on questions. What the heaven? No. Is heaven for real? For real? No. This video's heaven sent. No. Heaven help us. Hey everybody, welcome back to Questions. I'm Brennan Johnson, and this is a series where you can ask any questions having to do with faith, spirituality, religion, philosophy, basically what does it mean to be human, and then me and my wife will be answering these questions to the best of our abilities, probably not satisfactory. Like we've said in previous videos, we're not seeking to be the final word. We're not saying you have to believe what we're saying. We are hoping to be the first word in that we are sparking conversations where you can take what we say and digest it and think it through and find out where you agree and where you disagree and helping move the conversation along. It has been a while, so if you want to join, if you want to ask questions, you can always be commenting below, DMing, whether you are on our Instagram page from the Co-Mutual, which is a brand fancy new Instagram handle that we are choosing, our new name, or you're on the YouTube page, just my personal one, Brennan Johnson. You can always be asking more questions, and we will take them and we compile them, and we are working through them slowly but surely. So today, question 5, but episode 6, it was a two-parter. Last time we talked about hell. Today we are talking about heaven, and the question, just to reiterate, is, do you believe in heaven or hell? And if so, who goes to each, and what are they like? So, like the last episode, the last video, if you have not watched that, you should watch that first, because basically, like I said in the last video, yeah, I believe in hell, so I believe in heaven as well. I guess those two things aren't mutually linked, and I guess they don't have to be linked, but they kind of go together. If you believe in one, not the other, I guess that's possible, but it's pretty rare. And so I feel like I answered a lot of the questions, a lot of the pieces of this question in the last video, so I'm not going to reiterate them here, because when I talk about how I think about hell or what I believe about hell, you can kind of just take the inverse of that and apply it to heaven. So that's what I want to focus on in this video more than anything else is what is heaven like. And to do that, I got to get a little nitpicky. It's the pastor, theologian, student in me. Please forgive me. I'm not trying to be a douche. But when nowhere in Scripture does it really say that when we die, we go to heaven. Heaven is really only described as the place where angels and God dwell. Scripture talks about that when we die, we go to the new kingdom, paradise, the new earth. And that the old heaven and the old earth will pass away to make room for the new heaven and the new earth and paradise, the kingdom, whatever you want to call it. So when people say, like, oh, is my loved one in heaven? You're not technically wrong if you just go, nope. You might get smacked in the face, but like, that's just a common misconception, is really, we don't really go to heaven, we go to the new kingdom. And again, there's all the variants and the whole scale of what all of Christianity believes, the whole spectrum. Some people believe, like, yeah, actually we do go to heaven and we hang out with the angels and with God until everyone is dead, and then we all hang out in eternity, and that's when we go to the new. It's a whole thing. So I'm not going to say for certain, but really when we look into Scripture, when most people say heaven, they're actually talking about the new kingdom, the new earth, the place where we actually go to spend eternity. But most people call it heaven. I sometimes call it heaven. It's just in our culture, in our world, in this side of the hemisphere in the 21st century, when we say heaven, we're talking about the place we go to forever. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. I just wanted to say that to prove that I've taken a college Bible class. I've taken some. Again, there's a broad spectrum, in depending on where you fall in the structure of Christianity. I've talked to people who, just as they are annihilationists for hell, they're also annihilationists for heaven, which I find fascinating, and that they believe that nothing has inherent value if it lasts forever, that value comes from things ending. And so eventually all of us will have to just die, cease to exist, that we won't go on forever, really, that at a certain point we will just cease to exist. Spoiler alert, kind of like the ending of The Good Place. You have all these people who have lived so long that it's become its own form of hell because they're just mush, because they've just been having ceaseless pleasure forever. Other people believe that the idea of the new earth, the new heaven, the old passes away, that just like people go through this refining fire to get all the crud, all the sin, all the brokenness, all the faults burned away so that it can, from the ashes of our sin can grow back perfection, the earth will go through the exact same process. That when we talk about the new earth, it's the same sort of idea as the new creations. If I'm a new creation, the earth can be a new creation. And these people talk about how we then need to take care of the earth, take care of the environment, make sure that we're making the world a better place, because it's not the idea of, oh, this earth doesn't matter, I'm living for the next world. But this world is the world we get. And so I vibe with that only because I don't believe that we can just pass off caring about the planet because it's not our forever home. Whether or not this earth is the earth we live on forever, I don't really care. But when so much of Scripture talks about caring for the earth, caring for the ground, caring for creation, it makes it really hard to then go, I don't have to care for creation. Why does God talk about caring for his creation if we're not supposed to care for creation? The thing I've talked about most with people is the idea that actually heaven and eternity kind of worries them, because they think that all that eternity is we'll all be together in one big room, like a chapel or a church or something, and we'll just be worshiping God, worshiping the divine, worshiping the Creator forever. And that worries them because that sounds really boring. And not the humorous thing, but kind of the funny thing is, I, as a pastor, think that sounds really boring too. Just doing one thing forever sounds boring. And there are those people who argue, yeah, but when we're made perfect, it won't be boring because we'll be made perfect. To which I have to then argue, if walking through the refining fire, being made perfect, then means that I don't find sitting in a church service for all of eternity not boring, then it doesn't really sound like it's me in eternity. It sounds like I really have died, something else has taken over my form, and they get to live for eternity all happy and jazzed about being worshiping forever. But it doesn't sound like it's actually me. And that worried me for a really long time growing up, because I was like, heaven sounds really boring. And if I'm forced to like having to be in worship forever, then that sounds like hell, or it sounds like it's not actually me. As I have grown up and as I have really tried to dive into Scripture and what Scripture actually says, and talked with different theologians and pastors and people who this is their jam, as it is my jam now, I don't think that is what it's like. I think when talking about eternity as a finite being with a finite amount of intellect, trying to talk about what heaven is like a great example is a ship that is sunk in the ocean. I think is an example Peter Rollins, the philosopher and theologian, uses. Is when we try to comprehend God, when we try to comprehend eternity, it is like a ship that is sunk into the ocean. The ship holds within itself a tiny, tiny portion, and so you can say the ship contains the ocean, but that is really poor way of explaining it, because really the ocean contains the ship. What we see, what we know, is just the tiny little bit of ocean inside the ship, and the rest of the ocean is everything we don't know. Obviously, this is just conjecture and just based on own thought. But I find the idea of worshiping forever boring. And at the same time, I find the idea of, if you think about heaven like the show The Good Place, which again, spoiler alerts, but like, whatever, it's been out. The idea of like, oh, you just want something and the magical being gives it to you. The Janet, where you're like, Janet, I want ice cream. And then boom, ice cream is just in your hand. That too sounds really boring and I don't think is accurate. When we look into Scripture, more often than anything else in all of Scripture, both Old Testament, New Testament, Judeo-Christian Scriptures, when we look about what eternity is described as, the examples, the metaphors used, more often than anything is the idea of a garden and a farm. The idea of nature. And so, obviously, the people who were reading and writing and talking about eternity in that context first were ancient Israelites, and they were a heavy farming and gardening culture. And so maybe it's not actually farming and gardening in heaven, because, to me, having to farm for eternity also sounds almost as bad as having to sit in a worship session forever. Which, to clarify, not that I hate worshiping. I am a pastor, I go to church, I enjoy worshiping. But, if the worship has gone on to 2 or 3 hours, I'm like, hey, I got, stuff to do today. I'm human. And if you're saying that you're not, that you never get bored, you're a liar. So, all that to say that I don't think heaven is just worshiping forever in one big room with all of everyone. And I don't think it's just a society where you get everything you want the instant you want it. And the reason I believe that is Freud. So, bear with me if Freud makes you want to gag. I understand that Freud was a rough human being. But Freud had this idea called the edible complex. Some people call it the pleasure principle. And the edible complex, based on the Oedipal story, is that Oedipal wanted to sleep with his mother, but his father got in the way. We all know that ancient Greek story, Oedipus. We all know that ancient Greek story. And Freud interpreted that to, in a sense, say some people want to sleep with their mother and have to kill their father. And but beyond the actually physically doing that, he said that it relates to everyone in terms of life. That the mother is this pleasure principle and father is the reality principle. We all want what we want, and we always have reality getting in the way. We want to eat endless amounts of ice cream, but getting sick gets in the way. We want to climb a mountain, but gravity and air and our lack of muscles get in the way. We always have these things we want, and reality gets in the way. And we'll find that if we kill the reality, if we finally achieve what we want, it is not as pleasurable. So Freud really theorized, and a lot of philosophers and a lot of scholarly people over the generations have come up with the idea that the thing that truly brings joy is not actually the mother, not actually the pleasure principle, but the journey, the reality principle being in the way. The process of killing the reality principle to get what we want is actually where joy comes in. So if in heaven we can just say, I want this, and it comes into our hands and we have it in an instant, we won't be pleased. We won't have pleasure. It'll be hell. Getting everything we want the instant we want it will be hell. I personally believe that the reason the eternity is described as a garden in the Bible more often than not is because they're relating to the Israelites things the Israelites do. Meaning your culture, your purpose, the things you're doing are still going to be taking place in the afterlife. Society is not going to collapse and it's just us in a big room forever, or society doesn't really exist because anything you want will just come to you. No, you're still going to be you. You're still going to have all the desires, all the wants of you, but all the sin, all the imperfections will be taken out. So, for example, I like to write. I'm a writer. So in eternity, I will still have the desire to write, meaning I will never write the perfect story. I'm not going to write the perfect story and go, boom, I did it. I now have no more desires. I can just sit in the dirt and die. I'm always going to be seeking a better story, a new story. The band U2 has almost more Grammy nominations and wins than almost any other band in history. Do you think they're satisfied with that? Do you think they went, hey, we wrote Joshua Tree, we're done? Or do they keep making albums afterwards? Did their idea of what's the best music they can come up with change over time? And then they came out with Achtung Baby. Like, they're still changing and developing. They're still seeking the perfect song. And they're never going to get there because they're always changing. They're always developing. They're always growing. And what they want to do is changing. So the idea is that we're never going to get the pleasure principle. We're never going to reach the top of the mountain. When all is said and done, when we've gone through the refining fire, when all the sin, all the brokenness, all the crud gets burned away and we're made back perfect, we won't have no desires. We will have desires, we just won't be seeking them sinfully. If you are a scientist, I believe you will be a scientist in the new life. How that looks exactly, I don't know. But I believe your desires, your passions, who you are, doesn't just go away once you get to heaven. Why would God create us on earth with desires, with personality, with quirks and passions, and then when you die, you go to heaven, and it doesn't matter what your passions are because you'll be worshiping me forever in a room. It doesn't matter what your personality is like. You're not talking to anyone else. You're just worshiping me in a room. Why would that be how it is? That's so weird. We have desires so that we can have desires in the afterlife. We have personality so we can have personality in the afterlife. The thing that I don't accept is that everything we ever wanted will just be given to us. No, I think society will still advance because it's not the thing that actually brings us happiness. It's the journey to the thing. Society will still advance. We will still grow and change and adapt. We will spend eternity continuing to push society forward. The difference is that all the sin, all the brokenness, all the crud that gets in the way of that will be gone. What if, when we failed at achieving a task we set out, we didn't beat up ourselves, but we go, hey, it's part of the journey, I'll try again? What if we weren't trying to cut down our rival so that we can get ahead, but instead we went, hey, they're doing their thing, I'm doing my thing, let's maybe work together and let's accomplish this. What if all the jealousy, what if all the hate, what if all the rivalry, what if all the self-hatred, what if all of that disappeared, burned away, got rid of, and what was left was our perfect selves seeking the things we've been seeking for eternity? Then that wouldn't be boring. The idea that eternity is boring, and that's why annihilationists believe that we'll just die even if we go to heaven, I can't accept that, because I think if we just have boundless life, it'll never be boring. And so, yeah, you know what? I've heard of people say, hey, maybe, we'll still spend 2,000 years in a church all together worshiping God. Because what does 2,000 years look like when we're stacking it up against eternity? Maybe. I'm not going to say no. But I can't imagine all of our personality, all of our desires not mattering in the next life. Why create us as individuals if our individualism doesn't play into the afterlife? I just think it's been made perfect. So, that's what I got for you. I don't know if that helps, if that makes sense. Let me know your thoughts, your comments, and as always, you can always be sending more questions, however works for you. Comment, DM, follow along, like and subscribe, and do all the things that you do for the socials and the YouTubes and the Instagrams. But yeah, grace and peace. Cheers.